Welcome to Contemporary Black Voices, where we talk about issues that impact the Black community. My name is Dr. Sharon Michael Chadwell, and I will be your host today. Now, usually there are 4 of us on this panel, so missing today are Caleb Alexander, who is a New York Times bestseller, Chris Dawkins, who is a community activist and entrepreneur, and Fred Williams, who is an author and screenwriter. So today with me, I do have a special guest, Mr. Mario Salas, who is a historian, educator, and just all-around bad guy.
Yeah, and look at my face, you can tell.
So today's topic is something that kind of spun off of a conversation we've been having over the last few weeks related to the student protests on the college campuses for the pro-Palestinian protests. One of the questions that has emerged from those discussions are, why aren't we seeing these similar protests on the HBCUs? So Mario and I were talking last week about the history of Black student protests, and I thought that we're going to go ahead and bring this discussion live. So Mario, why aren't we seeing it, or you want to take us back in time first?
Well, the answer is complicated, it's not a simple answer, like most questions. And people always try to reduce, not you, but people try to reduce complex questions to simple answers, like you're driving through the fast food at McDonald's. It's not that way in real life. There's a complicated question. And so I'm going to go back, way back.
Okay.
And let's, first off, let's draw a line of distinction between the Bible and the Torah.
Okay.
Because in Israel, people who are Hebrew or Jewish, they believe in the Torah. They don't believe in a Christian Bible. They have another Bible or holy book, we'll call it holy book, because they don't accept Jesus. But the reason why that's somewhat confused in the Black church, going to the Black church, is the Torah is actually the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. So you'll see Abraham, you'll see the people in the Old Testament, their names are in their holy book. But that's kind of where it ends. It's the Old Testament. There is no New Testament because they don't believe in Jesus.
Okay.
So, and it's a problem because, and I remember this from Sunday school, people were always taught that the Jews were God's chosen people. And that's true. However, when Jesus came along, that's no longer true. Because Jesus said anybody can be chosen. Anyone, when they talked about Jews and Gentiles and so forth in the Bible, anyone can be chosen. And that's why they didn't like Jesus very much. That's why he would get into discussions and arguments with them in the temple. Not for that reason, but not just that reason. But the temple priest, and we're talking way back, of course, 2,000 plus years or whatever it is. The temple priest, you could make the argument were in cahoots with the Roman Empire.
Okay.
And whatever Caesar said, they went along with that. So you get that comment, do unto Caesar what's due unto Caesar, and so you get that comment. And as a result of, and you could make the argument that the temple priest of that day, and don't get me wrong, I ain't talking about now, but in that day, were pretty much puppets of the Roman Empire. They did whatever the Romans told them to do within certain limits, and then the Romans let them have some freedom of religion, of their religion. So when Jesus came along, I know there's no other better way to put this than to say Jesus overthrew the Old Testament.
Okay.
The Old Testament talked about revenge and killing and all that kind of stuff. And not that there's not some in the New Testament, but the Old Testament was all about that, whereas Jesus was always about love and forgiveness. That's totally different from the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. So if you're just reading the Old Testament and not spending enough time in the New Testament, you're missing more than half of the boat. And it's pretty much similar in the Islamic faith as well. The Quran is mostly Old Testament, just like the Torah, mostly Old Testament. Neither religion recognized, and I'm not kicking them under the bus as a religion, They have a right to believe whatever they want to believe, but neither religion except Jesus. So, but when you're a slave and you're being taught out of the Bible or parts of the Bible that the slave master wanted you to read.
And I have a copy of that Bible.
Oh my! And I'm glad you're doing. People who haven't got one, you can get one on Amazon. It's real thick, but it tells you every section in the Bible that was taken out, so that enslaved people would never be able to read it or even hear about it if you were preaching Christianity from that version of the Bible. I'm not talking about King William's version, new international version. I'm talking about the slave version. And a lot of people didn't know there is a slave version of the Bible. And so they're taught certain things, and other things are totally omitted or removed from the Bible. But nevertheless, you go back to slavery. Enslaved Africans who came here to this country were not Christians, so people need to get that out of their head. They were mostly Muslim or animist. Animists believe in animal spirits or water spirits, or whatever the case would be. But because they were enslaved, and the slavers said they believed in Christianity, which I don't believe, but the religion that they wanted the slaves to learn was Christianity. So they by force, forced enslaved Africans Christianity upon them. And so you're taught this not great version of the Bible and things omitted, and you're taught to abandon your old religion, accept this one, and this one that you're being taught to accept is not completely true. It's what they said it's true. And so you get this kind of strange understanding, and people don't. Even to this day, you see people mimic or comment or quote from the Bible only one page or only one verse without knowing what is the verse that contradicts that verse. Because the Bible is a book of wisdom, and it'll say one thing in the Old Testament and completely refute it in the New Testament. Whereas you might have, and just to give you an example of that, whereas you might have in the Old Testament, in the vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. But that's contradicted right off the top by the story of Samson and Delilah.
So if I'm hearing the direction that you're going, that the slave Bible or even just the Old Testament basically preached you honor and favor the Israelis. Israel.
Yeah, it teaches you subservience to a higher power, and that's okay if the higher power is God, not the Roman Empire. And so the temple priests were doing both. And that's one of the problems Jesus had with the temple priests.
So we're getting ready to go on break in a few minutes, but can we kind of take what you're saying and tie it into the mindset of why some Blacks are not engaged? I'm not saying all, because we do have some Black students going to the predominant white campuses to protest.
Right.
But on the masses, why that mindset might be a hindrance for HBCU students from protesting.
Yeah. Well, a lot of Black folks were raised in the Black church. And as a result of being raised in the Black church, they were taught one pastor or another. And by the way, not every pastor teaches the same way. So you get some pastors who believe that the Old Testament, the way it's written, is the absolute word of God, whereas you go to another church and they'll say, yeah, but that Bible's been tampered with. So there's a problem. But when most Black folks are raised in the Black church, they always hear that the Jews are God's chosen people without hearing the rest of the story.
Okay, so with that being said, we're going to take a quick break, and while you're waiting for us to come back, make sure you hit the subscribe button, the like button, and share the videos. We'll be right back.